made with spoken. Plague of Thought by Gabriel Stroop. Digital narration performed by Daniel.
A monk should surely love his books with humility, wishing their good and not the glory of his own curiosity. But what the temptation of adultery is for laymen, and the yearning for riches is for secular ecclesiastics. The seduction of knowledge is for monks. Umberto Eco, The Name of the Rose, 1980. One of the first Italians to give a name to the reawakened interest in Greek and Roman learning was the poet Petrarch, who announced early in the 1340s that poets and scholars were ready to lead the cities of Italy back to the glory days of Rome. Classical learning had declined, Petrarch insisted, into darkness and obscurity. Now was the time for that learning to be rediscovered. A rebirth, a renaissance. Susan Wise Bauer, The History of the Renaissance World, 2013. The purpose of history is to explain the present, to say why the world around us is the way it is. History tells us what is important in our world and how it came to be. It tells us what is to be ignored or discarded. That is true power, profound power, the power to define a whole society. Michael Crichton, Timeline, 1999. Prologue, Mutation.
My tiny village in the forested countryside was constantly trampled beneath the iron boots of knights before I learned to write. My sister and I were left to pick among the cinders for bread, finding only rats, and once a scorched psalter page. In its margins, some long-dead hand had inked beasts and shapes I could not name. I pressed it to my chest like they could keep me safe. That was the first time I thought words and pictures could outlast atrocity. Father Theoderic found me one day in a clearing soon after, as I was trying to find some sign of regrowth. He said the Lord specifically spared me for his service, and I believed him, for what else was left for me? He brought me to the square of the nearest city, where I saw my first trial. A man was bound to the stake, his hair wild and discoloured with ash. His voice stood steady even as the crowd spat at him and prayed for his damnation. The flames rose, and through his prayers he cried, "The truth does not belong only to the Church. Hold fast to it even in death." Father Theoderic told us afterwards that the man's pride had condemned him. I nodded, as he always expected, but even now, when I lay down to sleep, I feel the old psalter scrap hidden in my sleeve, and I continue to wonder if seeking truth was only pride, or if it was something holier.
Act 1, Infection. Chapter 1, A Procession of Smoke.
I watched the city choke in smoke and fever today. Bells tolled hollow above the stench of death. Father Theoderic thundered wrath from the cathedral steps, yet my eyes betrayed me. A child breathed again where prayer had failed. Was this God's mercy, or a blasphemy that mocked him? I cannot tell. The doubt gnaws in me deeper than this pestilence.
The streets burned with pyres of flesh. Flames clawed at blackened corpses stacked beneath the cathedral's looming shadow. Thick incense drifted across the cobbles, but its sweetness could not hide the rot of gangrene. From the living rose a chorus of coughs and groans, echoing the bell's hollow toll above. On the cathedral steps, Father Theoderic lifted a crucifix high. Candlelight flickered against his stern face as his voice broke through like lightning.
This pestilence is no accident of nature but the judgment of God. It is your pride that has invited his hand against you. Repent, and you shall be spared.
The crowd shivered. Some clutched their rosaries, others hid their eyes, but all were swayed by the certainty in his voice. His gaze swept over them, pausing when it found Matthaeus.
Do not falter, Brother Matthaeus.
The voice cut like a lash.
Even when fever touches your own kin, hold steady the faith. Remember your duty.
Matthaeus bowed as his chest tightened. Duty, faith, obedience. These words often felt like armor, but that armor has begun to dent. Some ways ahead of the steps on the street, A cloaked physician bent over a boy belabored with shallow breaths. The physician's beaked mask was smeared with soot and blood, but his hands moved steady as he pressed vinegar-soaked cloth to the boy's swelling sores. Muffled through the fabric, he said to the boy,
"Calm, child. Breathe."
Matthaeus stepped closer, watching the doctor's methods. The boy's rattling chest eased, and colour faintly returned to his cheeks. Brother Ulrich prayed over a second boy nearby.
"Dear Lord, show your mercy for a child of your kingdom."
His whispered petitions rose in desperate volume, but his boy only grew paler by the breath. Matthaeus stared, the contrast searing itself into his mind. He moved closer, and with a taut voice, he asked the doctor,
You trust in these man-made fluids more than in God?
The physician did not look up, attention still caught on the boy's breathing.
"I trust in what saves. Prayer does not drain the pus nor ease the breath. Mercy is given not through words, but through action."
The doctor later gave his name, Johannes of Lübeck. Matthaeus looked beside them, watching Brother Ulrich continue to plead with God. He had even switched to Latin, as if God himself had a preference for prestigious tongues. Yet the boy under his care still struggled. Behind them, Theodoric's sermon roared on. As one boy's chest rose and fell in smooth action, while the other's chest sputtered, Matthaeus felt the old Psalter page heavy in his sleeve and wondered if life somehow obeyed laws the Church does not command. The bell tolled again, smoke curling into the grey sky. Beneath its flow, a thought stirred, unwelcome and alive. Perhaps faith alone was not enough. The walk back home felt heavier than the soot on Matthaeus' cloak. The bells still echoed as he pushed open the wooden door. Lavender lingered faintly, but it did nothing to drive out the stench of dread. Clara sat on a stool by the hearth, her skin pale, her cough shallow but insistent. The orange light of the fire flickered over her, threatening to burn a wooden rosary in her own hands. Its intricate texture had worn smooth from constant prayer. Feeling his presence, she whispered with shut eyes,
"Brother Matty, Father Theoderic says those who scourge their pride will be spared. We must trust him."
Matthaeus knelt beside her and took her hand, feeling the rosary beads pressing into his palm. He forced his voice into steadiness.
Of course. Faith shields the soul. God will guard us.
Clara's lips curved into a weak smile.
"I am not afraid if God is near."
But Matthaeus was afraid. He recalled Johannes's boy, his chest rising, while Ulrich's boy grew still. He heard the physician's quiet defiance in the face of a man of God's boisterous commands. Clara's voice trembled through another prayer.
Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum.
Her Latin was flawless as when he first taught her. Matthaeus bowed his head, whispering the words along with hers, but they faltered in his throat.
Santa Maria Mater Dei.
The prayer broke into silence. In its place rose another plea from his mind, not just to heaven, but to anything that might yet keep her with him. Chapter 2. The Benedictine Scriptorium.
I came here seeking forgiveness. Father Theodoric's voice still echoes in my skull, and Clara's cough still claws at my chest. If my faith wavered at the sight of a child breathing under the physician's hand, perhaps the psalms and the sooth of quiet labour will steady me. Yet the silence here weighs more than comfort. These stone columns feel ready to bend and collapse upon me.
The scriptorium of the Benedictine monastery smelled of ink, wax, and iron dust. Candles flickered in uniform rows. Their light trembled across chained tomes, volumes, and the tonsured heads of copying monks. It was a quieter place than Theodoric's Dominican house. There were no thundering sermons, nor vocal threats of judgment. Here, every sound was patient and penitent, coming through the soft scratching of quills, the shuffle of vellum, and the murmured rhythm of psalms. They all worked, to soothe the pangs of sin. Prior Umberto moved among the copiers. The flaps of his robes whispered against the stones at his feet. His face bore the calm of one accustomed to silence, defaulting to a solemn expression of constant contemplation. As he guided Matthaeus to a spare desk in the scriptorium, his eyes spotted the tremor in Matthaeus's hand.
"Copy with care, brother,"
He said gently.
"Every stroke honors the word, and the word is more than its letters."
He gestured to the psalter on the desk, whose edges glimmered faintly with golden leaf.
"This one is special. The sister who illuminates these pages works as if the beauty of creation lies in the act of creation itself."
Matthaeus inclined his head.
I thought the margins were for ornament alone.
Umberto smiled faintly.
Ornament is just another form of keeping the word. Marietta is only but one of God's messengers.
The prior drifted away, leaving Matthaeus in the company of an inkpot and the faint smell of linseed oil. Beside the manuscript was a blank parchment, patiently waiting for his hand. Time seemed to pause around him as he traced through the familiar lines of Latin proverbs from the fading manuscript into their new home until something caught his eye. The dull yellow leaves hid a series of tiny forms, foxes, rabbits, and serpents. They all bore fantastic proportions, like they were caught in the act of playing under a spiral of circles that looked like the celestial paths of Ptolemy. Matthaeus's eyes grinned at the whimsy, just as he read the words spilling between the frolicking beasts. Pestilence moves through the air as seed, not wrath but nature. Galen writes of humours unbalanced and of remedies to restore them. Matthaeus's hand froze. Seed? Humours? These were not the words of prayer, but of inquiry, human speculation masquerading as scripture. His pulse quickened as he realized these were also not of Latin scripture, but of Occitan vernacular, as if they spoke beyond the voice of the Almighty, giving words of healing meant only for his eyes at this specific moment. In his mind, the distant toll of a bell seemed to merge with the echo of Clara's cough, and he felt again the helplessness of kneeling beside her, begging for a reprieve. A voice came from the doorway.
Curious, isn't it?
Matthaeus turned. A woman leaned against the stone archway, lit only by the flickering candles nearby. Her cloak was spattered with pigments, her hands smudged with gold. Caught in the dim candlelight was her red hair and green eyes, both touched with the glint of mischief.
You are Marietta?
He breathed, uncertain whether to bow or cross himself.
Do not look so scandalized,
she said, stepping closer.
I paint beasts and saints who carry their own secrets.
He looked down at the psalter, at the cryptic annotations.
You wrote these words?
Perhaps, or perhaps I only shared what another dared to write.
Her tone was neither proud nor fearful, only quietly amused.
Knowledge seeps into the cracks, Brother Matthaeus, no matter how many layers try to obscure it.
He swallowed.
You risk too much. These words could see you burned.
Marietta only gave a smile as she looked down, averting his gaze. For a moment, neither spoke. The air felt charged, as if the faintest sound could shatter the fragile peace of the room. Then Marietta's voice gentled, meeting his eyes again.
You came seeking forgiveness. But maybe what you need is perspective. Faith and reason are not enemies, Matthaeus. They are both ways of seeing.
Her words struck like light through glass, bright, dangerous, and impossible to unhear. As Marietta motioned to sit at her own desk, the scriptorium returned to silence. Manuscripts were scraped, rewritten, and carefully put away, but with Prior Umberto's permission, Matthaeus held close the psalter of Occitan proverbs imaginatively illuminated by Marietta's bestiary. When Matthaeus left the monastery, the sky was pale with dawn. The air was refreshingly crisp, the bells distant. He held his Lent psalter close beneath his cloak. The Theoderic sermons continued in his mind like a home signal, but softer now, as if filtered through new layers of imagination. What lingered louder was Marietta's voice. Faith and reason are both ways of seeing. Chapter 3. Loss of a Sister.
Today I prayed for Clara, as I always had in childhood, when our whispered psalms seemed to rise like sparks to heaven. But today, heaven was silent. Johannes stood ready with remedies, yet she pressed my rosary, as though it alone might banish death. I do not know who was more betrayed, Clara, who trusted, or I, who watched faith unravel in my hands.
The quarantine house stood at the ragged edge of the village, its door charred with black crosses, warning all to keep away. Smoke drifted from braziers, while vinegar stung the air, yet no cleansing could pierce the sour breath of sickness within. Matthaeus pushed through the portal, rosary cutting into his hand. His breath caught at the sight of Clara on the cot. She lay swaddled in damp sheets, her lips cracked, her cheeks flushed with fever. Dark buboes swelled at her neck, their stench filling the room. Each shallow whimper from her throat dragged him back to their childhood nights, when she whispered psalms beside him in the dark. Where their prayers once flew like angels, they now dropped like hard stones. Johannes was already present, unrolling his bundle of cloths and tinctures nearby, his beaked mask tilted toward Clara, voice muffled but firm.
You need fluids to cool the fever and air to ease the sinus. I can help.
At the sound of his voice, Clara weakly stirred. Her eyes fluttered open just long enough to spot Matthaeus. She reached for him, her small fingers trembling. Her voice came thin between coughing fits.
No. No physicians. Only God can heal me.
Her hand felt for the rosary around Matthaeus' neck. She clutched it with desperate strength.
Clara, please.
Matthaeus pleaded, torn between comfort and terror.
Let him try.
But the girl shook her head, lips cracked in pain.
Pray with me.
She gasped.
That will be enough.
Johannes's gloved hands hovered in readiness, but paused before lowering in resignation. His tone was grave, edged with bitterness.
Faith is no salve against lungs filled with rot, but it cannot be forced.
So Matthaeus prayed. He forced psalms through his throat, coated with phlegm that broke his words. He repeated them endlessly until they became little more than sobful whimpers. Johannes stood still in the shadows, a silent witness, as the fever burned higher and Clara's breaths grew shorter, rattling, then faint. Her final sigh slipped like a thread pulled free. The rosary slid from her hand so suddenly that it broke, beads dropping and scattering across the stone floor. Through his tears, Matthaeus watched them roll one by one, each clatter a cruel echo of the cathedral bells. Silence, merciless silence pressed in. His palms were empty, his chest hollow except for the heaviness of abandonment. Johannes bowed his head.
I am sorry, Matthaeus.
Wiping his face, Matthaeus shook his head.
You were ready to save her. She did not want it, nor, it seems, did the Lord.
He bowed over her still form, murmuring prayers from his lips, but they tasted of ash. Chapter 4. Church of Shadows.
Tonight the cathedral felt less a house of God and more a forgotten tomb of unanswered prayers. Father Theoderic verbally fought against the plague, and yet I heard no comfort in his words. He named me among his chosen, an investigator of heresy. But how am I to seek rebellion in others when I feel its roots already twisting in myself? Clara's silence still lingers in my ear, and I cannot tell if faith failed her, or if I did.
The cathedral chamber burned with tiny lights. Candles smouldered in clustered candelabra. Their glow danced along woven tapestries of pestilence, horsemen galloping through fire, angels brandishing swords, and demons feasting on the damned. Shadows flickered over embroidered skulls, and halos wreathed in flame. Father Theoderic stood before the assembly, his shadow towering across the walls, as though the cathedral itself obeyed him.
This plague is the crucible of our time.
He intoned, voice sharp as steel.
We must burn away the corruption, lest the fire of God consume us all. We need more processions, more healing psalms, more cleansing of corrupted texts. The devil hides in parchment as well as in flesh.
A murmur of assent rippled among the gathered clergy. 2 monks dragged forward a chest of books, their bindings shimmering and ancient. Without hesitation, they were cast into the brazier. Leather hissed, vellum curled, and ink ran black like blood across the flames. Matthaeus spotted the bouncy penmanship of Greek and the curly calligraphy of Arabic before they disappeared into the air. Theodoric's gaze fixed on him.
You, Brother Matthaeus, have witnessed yourself the unrelenting power of God's mercy. You have held fast even when he has taken your own family. You know what's at stake.
His words pierced like a blade. Mercy? Clara's hollow eyes flashed in Matthaeus' memory. If her death was mercy, what crueler fate awaited him? Despite these thoughts, he bowed, jaw clenched. Theoderic stepped closer through the crowd, as it was mesmerized by the dancing fire. He lowered his voice, so that only Matthaeus and the nearest brethren could hear.
Since you have proven steadfast, I name you my eyes in the streets. This contagion spreads not only through bodies, but through whispers. You will root out those who stray, those who trust in charms and physicians more than the sacraments.
His voice faltered, as if catching a bug in his throat at the mention of physicians.
Especially the Jews, the criminals of our Lord, who have dared to take it upon themselves to heal his people.
Voices murmured in agreement. One brother exclaimed,
"We must be wary of one, Johannes of Lübeck. Brother Matthaeus has witnessed his acts himself."
Theoderic kept his gaze on Matthaeus.
Indeed, my son. Bring me their names, and we shall cleanse God's flock.
The reply came from Matthaeus's mouth, automatically brittle as glass.
As you wish, Father.
When the chamber emptied and fire smothered, Brother Ulrich lingered, sweat shining on his narrow face, fingers tracing the hem of his robe.
This is a holy charge, Matthaeus. Few are privileged to carry such trust.
Matthaeus lowered his voice.
My sister prayed until her last breath, and still the fever claimed her. Tell me, brother, do you never wonder if there is more we might do?
Ulrich recoiled, eyes darting to the shadowed corners.
Do not speak so. Doubt is the devil's foothold. You have a place here. Guard it. Serve, and her death may yet bear fruit. Question, and you may lose both your station and your soul.
Matthaeus nodded outwardly, but inside Clara's memory burned. While the fires of heresy could be smothered to silence, he could not smother the echo of Johannes's steady hands, nor Galen's words scrawled in salter margins. Chapter 5. Surveillance and Suspicions.
I once believed that obedience would guard the soul as surely as walls guard a city. Yet the more I watched, the more these stones of faith themselves seemed to shift. In the faces of the sick, I saw not punishment, but pleas for mercy. Father Theoderic commanded vigilance, but what I saw that night was not heresy, but mercy draped in reason. Still, I wrote only what would not condemn me.
The streets sagged under an oppressive inversion of hunger and fear. Market stalls stood as empty facades, displaying only shriveled roots and fish that were grey at the gills. Smoke from the grave pits drifted low and subtle, stinging the eyes of those still lost enough to wander after dusk. The voices of the living grew thin and sharp, like the sharpening of daggers.
They say the midwives poison the wells.
A woman whispered, clutching a bundle of wilted herbs.
I've heard worse.
Another murmured.
Jewish doctors spread powders and conjure wicked charms. Father Theoderic swears by it.
Their words followed Matthaeus like gnats in salty heat. Ahead of him, a boy threw a stone at a boarded window, shouting,
"Sorceress! Devil's kin!"
The stone thudded as it bounced from the wood and crashed into the brush below. The crowd's muttering grew bolder as fear curdled into cruelty. Matthaeus drew his cloak tight, hiding the small psalter scrap tucked in his sleeve. Theodoric's directive weighed against his chest like lead.
Watch for unorthodox healers. Report them, and we shall purge.
He turned down a narrow lane where lanterns burned dim over the sick houses. There he found Johannes moving among the afflicted, his physician's mask pale and moon-shaped. Around him, other healers bent to their tasks, although not all wore matching masks. Johannes spoke softly to a young Franciscan.
Remember Hippocrates. Do no harm,
he said, as the monk passed out clean bandages. The friar nodded, then lifted a basin of vinegar as he replied.
And remember St. Francis, do what's necessary, do what's possible, and suddenly you are doing the impossible.
The physicians and the friars worked through a smooth and efficient rhythm. Johannes and the other physicians pressed soaked cloths to the hands of the fevered, poured water for the parched, and marked doors with chalk and ash to warn the healthy. The Franciscans moved quietly alongside, carrying herbs, sweeping straw, and reciting psalms as they went. Where one offered balms, the other offered blessings. There was no quarrel between them, only labor and grief, intertwined together like thought and breath. Matthaeus watched from the portal of a darkened doorway. His Dominican training told him to see sin everywhere, to note irregularities. But all he saw was the measured mercy of practiced hands. No invocation, no powder, no superstition, only discipline shaped by knowledge. And when the friar clasped Johannes's shoulder in thanks before departing, Matthaeus glimpsed in their exchange not rivalrous defiance, but cooperative fellowship. A compromise born of need, not heresy. Still, Matthaeus's pulse quickened as he turned away. To watch such cooperation between the Church's servants and those she distrusted was to feel the world quietly tilt in nausea. Clara's face rose unbidden in his mind. Her lips moved soundlessly in prayer, her eyes bright with fever. Johannes fought the same darkness with instruments, not words, and time after time the illness yielded to easily observed results. That contrast stung sharper than any of Father Theodoric's sermons. Later, as a darker twilight fell over the cloistered courtyard of the cathedral, Matthaeus found the same Franciscan kneeling beside a well, rinsing his hands raw in a bucket of cold water. The friar looked up as Matthaeus approached.
Can I help you, brother?
Matthaeus, I do not mean to interrupt.
The monk stood and waved his hand.
Do not feel troubled. I was only washing myself of the day's work, preparing for the morrow.
The Franciscan introduced himself as Brother Gabrielus. Matthaeus made his curiosity known.
You are often communing with the physicians, even as they commune with the dying. Do you not fear censure? Father Theoderic calls their methods heresy.
The friar smiled wearily.
God forgive me, but Father Theoderic is rather old-fashioned.
The two brothers began walking the perimeter of the courtyard as Gabrielus continued.
Obedience must lead to healing, not harm. When our rules wound the simple and innocent, they are no longer of God's will.
You would defy a command of the Church.
I serve not an institution, but the Spirit itself. My brethren and I, we were sent from beyond these lands to tend to the poor and dying. If God's truth lives in their relief, then perhaps God works through their reasons for healing, rather than the arguments against it.
Matthaeus's thoughts went to Johannes.
What of him? Was he too sent from beyond these lands?
Gabrielus only gave a soft smile.
I know little of his life, but I have heard he comes to us trained by the great Parisian practitioners. He is certainly no mere barber surgeon.
Surely he is a Christian, then.
I do not know, but if he is doing God's work, I need not trouble myself with such unassuming details.
Matthaeus felt a tremor of unease, translating into a tremor in his hands.
You speak as though reason and faith were of the same path.
The friar's eyes softened with his smile.
Perhaps not the same path, but two wings of the same soul. Break one and the soul cannot rise.
For a moment, silence pooled between them. broken only by the drip of water from the friars' fingers and their footsteps along the damp earth. As they reached the gate leading out of the courtyard, Matthaeus paused as Gabrielus made the sign of the cross. He quietly prayed.
Take care, Brother Matthaeus. Compassion bears a cost, but cruelty bears a greater one.
When Matthaeus returned to the cathedral, the chill of the night air clung to his skin like guilt. Inside, torches burned with oily flame, their smoke thick against the vaulted ceiling. Father Theoderic waited at his desk, a silhouette carved of shadow and authority.
Well?
The Inquisitor asked, as he scanned Matthaeus's reporting parchment.
What have you seen?
Matthaeus bowed, voice steady.
I observed the physicians at their work. They sealed doors, tended the sick with cloth and liquid. They spoke of charity, not black charms. I saw no heresy, Father.
Theodoric's gaze was cold and searching on the parchment.
And this Johannes, no powders, no rites, no whisper of blasphemy?
None.
Matthaeus replied, forcing calm.
Only cloth, vinegar, and water.
Theodoric leaned back, fingers steepled.
There are always accomplices. The devil thrives not just through the blasphemer, but also through the sympathizer. Remember that, my son. Compromise is the first contagion.
Matthaeus's pulse quickened. He almost spoke aloud of the friars who prayed beside the healers, of their mercy that smelled of sweat and vinegar instead of incense and empty gestures. But here he saw the first glint of malice in Theodoric's eyes, cold and unfeeling. He thought of how easily one man's kindness could become heresy by the words of another.
There are no others to report, Father,
Matthaeus said, with the calmness of a man protecting his brethren. Theoderic gave a cold stare for a few seconds, but his countenance quickly changed to a positive expression with a satisfied smile.
Good. Then we shall see where this path leads.
When Matthaeus bowed and turned away, his chest ached with silence. The psalter scrap hidden in his sleeve scratched against his skin like a thorny rebuke, the creature's whispering words he dared not speak. He always told himself that a mission was just the same as a lie. Here it was a mercy. That night, as the bells tolled for the dead, Matthaeus came to understand. To see the truth was to now commit heresy. Act 2, Transmission. Chapter 6, Interrogation of the Physician.
The chamber was meant to frighten him, not me. His pestle lay on the table, like a relic of forbidden rites. Yet Johannes did not tremble. He spoke of seeds carried in the air, words I had traced in my psalter's margins. I tried my best to hide myself. Instead, I listened. And in listening, I betrayed the role Father Theoderic had carved for me.
The dungeon chamber under the cathedral reeked of damp stone and candle smoke. Iron chains hung loose from the table's edge, their clatter breaking the silence whenever Johannes moved. Before Matthaeus lay Johannes's tools, pestle and mortar, bundles of dried herbs, and a vial of vinegar, all spread on the hardwood table like evidence of a crime scene. Johannes sat upright, chained to the desk, his beaked mask discarded in a corner. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, but they still carried a strange calm of a man befreed of guilt. Matthaeus cleared his throat and recited the formal charge.
Johannes of Lübeck, you are charged with spreading false remedies, conspiring with the dark arts, and leading souls astray from the mercy of God. Do you confess?
Before he could answer, Matthaeus saw the shadow of Father Theoderic's presence, shifting the entire chamber, silent and immovable. Matthaeus didn't dare look into the father's face. He only saw a faint smile touch the doctor's lips as he said,
I confess only to sparing life where others promise death.
These words struck Matthaeus sharper than any rebuke. Calm and gentle, like the boy in the grips of the plague, suddenly coaxed back from the brink. Theodoric's face remained unreadable, carved of stone. Matthaeus's voice wavered as he pressed on.
Your instruments are demonic charms. Your herbs reek of idolatry. It is not for you to force the will of God.
Johannes tilted his head.
And yet you saw it with your own eyes, did you not? A boy's breath returned with cloth and vinegar, while a faithful woman of your own blood suffered worse under God's will. Are my actions, drawn from the wisdom of the ancients, truly enough to curb the will of God?
The allusion to Clara only conjured her image in Matthaeus' mind. He would have been cast into a trance had Johannes' chains not rattled as he leaned forward. With a steady voice he said,
I tell you this, Matthaeus, this plague is not just wrath, but of nature, born from seeds of death adrift in the air, invisible but real. They take root in the lungs and blood. As weeds choke the harvest, so these seeds choke the body. This is not blasphemy. It is the plain truth, as plain as Yahweh himself.
The phrase, too, stung Matthaeus, for he had seen these very words inked into the margins of psalters. Now here they lived, spoken aloud. He looked down to see his hands trembling on the parchment of charges.
Tell me, investigator, what do you believe? Is your faith so frail it fears truth?
Matthaeus shut his eyes in a vain attempt to hide from the piercing words of the doctor. Above them, the cathedral bells deeply tolled through the stones. Father Theoderic finally broke his silence, his tone brisk and cold.
Release him for now. The truth of God will not be shaken by a physician's babble.
Guards nearby unshackled Johannes and led Johannes away as he carried a face of quiet resolve. In the silence that followed, Theoderic circled around Matthaeus and fixed his eyes on him with a cold fire gaze.
You faltered. Pity clouds your judgment, my son. Do not let it. There are others who spread doubt more insidiously than this physician. Seek out the scribes and artists, for they cloak heresy disguised in God's work.
Matthaeus bowed his head, voice thin.
Yes, Father.
But rather than a warning, Theoderic's words felt like a summons for Matthaeus's curiosity. An awareness began to seed within him that knowledge and faith could perhaps coexist in tension, and that the Church's chains might not bind the whole truth after all. Chapter 7. Workshop of Secrets.
Tonight I walked into a room where the walls breathed two faces at once, one for the faithful, one for the questioning. Marietta's hand moved with such ease that Scripture itself bent and reshaped beneath her brush. She told me saints were veils, their halos carried planets, their hands signaled stars. I should have fled. Instead, I listened, spellbound. It was as though the world itself was speaking from beneath its own disguise.
The chamber smelled of molten lead and scorched resin, where shards of lapis blues and iron reds glimmered across Marietta's work table. By candlelight, the unfinished glass panels held the frame of a solemn saint, his robe composed of luminous scarlet panes, while a golden halo shone from yellowed glass. Beneath the colored mosaic, barely visible in the lead sketches, concentric circles framed the space around the halo, circular geometries too precise for spontaneous ornament. Arcs were carefully orchestrated as planets revolved in their courses. Marietta stood before the panel, iron tool in hand, her dark smock flecked with powdered glass. Her red hair swept and tied away from her face, while a droplet of blood welled on her thumb where she'd cut herself on a shard. It fell like a crimson jewel onto the floor. Matthaeus hesitated at the sight of an artist at work.
You make saints.
His voice was cautious, accidentally phrased like an accusation. Marietta turned, her lips curving in a sly smile.
I build what they like to see.
She lifted the glass towards the window, where light filtered gold through it. The saint's fingers, raised in blessing, bent toward the hidden geometry above him.
They see Christ now, but centuries later they might see Ptolemy.
Drawn closer, Matthaeus mentally traced the lines of graphite marking the parchment closest to him. His throat tightened.
This is forbidden.
Forbidden.
Marietta echoed, her tone amused.
And yet here it lives, sanctified by light itself. The truth need not be so verbal to endure. It can persist through coloured glass, hiding in holy sight, waiting for its time.
She slid a ruby shard into place, its edge catching fire in the window's glow.
The church fathers burned books, the bishops silenced tongues. But glass? Glass hides nothing. It holds its second face in plain sight, refracted in every beam of sunlight, even if it shatters into pieces.
Heat rose in Matthaeus's chest, a fever not from sickness, but from the audacity of the thought. He thought of Johannes, his resolve shackled yet unbroken, speaking of seeds adrift in air. He thought of his psalter from the monastery scriptorium, its margins alive with messages of the past. Now the glass seemed like yet another margin, truth smuggled within colour and lines, easily seen by everyone, waiting like a dormant seed beneath soil.
Pramini,
He whispered.
have you hidden this way?
Marietta's eyes gleamed like faces of jade.
Enough that when one is shattered, another still speaks. Enough that when the world is ready, it will remember what was never allowed to be known.
For a moment, Matthaeus forgot to breathe. The coloured panes glowed like living fire. He was both awed and terrified, mesmerized by the thought that knowledge could outlast the church, not in abject secrecy, but in subtle disguise, an unkillable contagion carried by thought and expression. Knowledge and faith collided in his mind, tangled like the stained panes themselves. Could the church truly endure, while truth sat in silence within its saints? Could Matthaeus himself endure, coming to learn that the unkillable seed of thought was alive just out of reach of priestly command? Marietta's iron tool tapped against the lead frame, sharp as a nail striking bone. As it rang out, Matthaeus became aware of another rhythm echoing faintly from the street below, chanting voices and the crack of leather on flesh. He turned to the window. Beyond the darkened glass, torchlight wavered, shadows moved in unison. The sound grew clearer. Penitents bore their backs bare. Flagellants marched beneath the night sky as a tide of devotion rose to meet the plague. Chapter 8. Play of the Flagellants.
Tonight the streets were refreshed with sound and blood. They called it penance, but I saw only spectacle. Torches flared, backs split open beneath lashes, and Father Theoderic demanded ever more. Once, I might have marvelled at such devotion. Now, I saw nothing but pain harnessed into obedience. A hollow performance, seeding fear that spread faster than the plague itself.
Night cloaked the streets, broken only by the sway of torches and the crack of whips. Barefoot penitents shuffled in unison, faces drawn low, voices high of prayer. Blood striped their backs, dripping into streaks of crimson. Matthaeus stepped onto the street as they recited fragments of Latin between their cries of pain. They reminded him of Clara's dying Latin prayers, but much less elegant and precise. The crowd around them pressed close, in half reverence and half horror. Mothers lifted children to watch, as if cruelty could instruct in piety. From a platform above, Theodoric's voice roared over the procession.
Do you see? This is the price of sin and the proof of redemption. Through blood, through pain, the Lord purifies his people. Take up the scourge, and the scourge of pestilence shall pass from our doors.
The crowd howled in assent. Torches flared brighter, smoke choked the air, and the lashes fell faster, rhythm like a drumbeat of despair. The city itself began to convulse in a community-wide theatre of suffering, attempting to act forth its own salvation. Matthaeus did not join the cries. His stomach churned at the rippling of flesh, at the barbaric ritual that consumed its own faithful. What once awed now sickened. Self-sacrifice turned into public spectacle. Pain wielded as control. His mind recalled Johannes's calm voice, and Marietta's hidden planets in stained glass. Compared to that, this was manufactured theatre, a service at the altar of blind obedience. A penitent stumbled close to Matthaeus, his back bearing a map of raw wounds. He gave a ragged cry.
Deliver us, O Lord.
Matthaeus stepped away, bile rising. He could not call this holiness. It was performance designed to bind fear into the common psyche, so that Theodoric's voice would ring louder than doubt. Above, the cathedral bell tolled, blending with the shouts. For the first time, Matthaeus heard not faith, but abject command in its chime. Through the smoke and agony, a hand brushed his sleeve. Marietta, her hood drawn low, kept her eyes steady in the torchlight. She pressed a small shard of crimson glass into his palm, the edge smooth against his skin. Her whisper barely reached him, carried below the clamour.
If you grow weary of these bloody mystery plays, come to where truth hides its stage. At dusk, in the crypt beneath the monastery.
Then she slipped back into the crowd, vanishing among the hoods and torches, leaving Matthaeus with the shard gleaming red in his hand, blood or light or both. Chapter 9. Cryptic Secrets.
I was led beneath the Benedictine monastery tonight, where I've only known its surface. The stones there seemed weary from the weight of footsteps across the centuries, damp with the prayers of the dead. By torchlight, they unfurled manuscripts not meant for eyes like mine. Aristotle, Galen, Lucretius, fragments of the ancients who spoke of causes and cures without naming Abrahamic wrath. Each voice around me spoke in a different tongue, one of sharing, one of concealment, one of fire. I felt my soul torn between them, as though I too were a manuscript to be copied, altered, or burned.
The crypt was damp, its walls carved with faded crosses and worn effigies. Candles guttered in intricate niches, throwing shadows across stone walls and coffins. On a long slab at the centre lay manuscripts, their vellum pages smudged with fingerprints. Torchlight revealed verse fragments of various languages, diagrams of bodies, and circles of planets. Forbidden words preserved in ink, the lucky ones compared to those in the church of Father Theoderic. Many heads filled the crypt, engaged in quiet conversation. Physicians, artists, and tradesmen of various backgrounds bartered in ideas and materiel, but the topic of the night was how to best protect them. Johannes stood over the slab, his voice urgent but measured.
We cannot keep this knowledge buried. Knowledge lives only when it breathes freely. If plague comes from seeds in the air, then the truth must spread like seed as well. To hoard it is to doom it forever.
Marietta, seated on a sarcophagus adjacent to the slab, shook her head with a sly smile.
If you fling seed on stone, it withers. The fathers burn books while bishops watch every hand. Better to sow knowledge in plain sight, like how I've slipped the antiques into Christ. A truth that lies dormant will bloom when the season changes.
Johannes frowned.
Symbols are not cures. We need remedies, not riddles nor interpreters.
And yet,
Marietta countered, tapping her glass shard against the stone.
Your remedies have been branded as heresy. My riddles live on pages and glass they dare not destroy.
From the murmuring sea of hoods and masks came a gravelled growl.
And what of him?
Sir Anselm stepped into the torchlight, face scarred and broad-shouldered. His hand hovered over the hilt of his rusted broadsword. His eyes glinted under his iron helm with suspicion as he kept his gaze on Matthaeus.
Why is a churchman among us? Have you all grown so desperate that you've invited the father's hound into the kennel?
The words struck like a spear. Matthaeus froze, lips beginning to part in protest, but Johannes spoke first, tone firm.
He is no hound. He has seen with his own eyes what remedies can do, what faith alone cannot. He is here because he doubts, and doubt is the first step toward truth.
Marietta's smile curved sharper.
Besides, Anselm, who better to see the mask than the one forced to wear it? He knows the theatre of their sermons, And like you, he sees the emptiness in their words. That makes him more dangerous to the Church than any of us.
Anselm's sneer deepened, voice roughened by years of bitterness.
I have bled with my brothers on holy soil, while his kind fattened themselves on coin and absolution. They sent us to kill, to die, to rot in their name, and now one of them stands here freely, as if mere words and doubts can just wash away centuries of blood.
Holy soil. Matthaeus's mind rang with familiarity at the phrase, recalling his childhood in the calm forest village until it was ruthlessly pillaged by supposed knights of God. Sir Anselm slammed his fist against the stone slab, manuscripts flapping in the breeze.
Enough of the covertness, enough of patience. If these pages of the ancient masters unmask these godly lies, let us hurl them from the pulpits until the bells themselves crack.
Marietta's smile sharpened.
And when those bells crack, Sir Anselm, the fire will come for us all. Your rage may burn the Church, but you will burn with them.
Anselm sneered.
Better a pyre than a leash. I'll not crawl while they preach upon our plague-ridden flesh.
Johannes interjected, quieter but firmer.
Revolt is truly no cure. If you burn the house to rid it of sickness, you bury the living with the dead. We need deliberate wisdom, not Pyrrhic ruin.
Anselm's expression lightened as he softly touched his facial scar.
It was indeed your wisdom that saved me so many years ago.
But his countenance quickly darkened again.
Yet the Church thinks it can decide who is worthy of such intervention. These men of God should be tested on their willingness to die for their faith, as we all have been forced to do under their visage.
Steady yourself, Sir Anselm.
Prior Umberto appeared behind them, accompanied by Brother Gabrielus and his troop of Franciscan friars.
We must not let the actions of our corrupted leaders define the movement they once represented. We have helped you all when we could, without compromising what we believe to be God's unnerving truth. You are all under our house tonight, after all.
Sir Anselm searched for rebutting words, but found none. Instead, Johannes opened up the floor.
Churchmen and laymen alike must embrace this knowledge that risks destruction otherwise.
Marietta quickly retorted, tone rising with annoyance.
Yet this very sharing is what places it at risk.
The debating voices quickly collided, echoing from all sides of the crypt. Johannes and the physicians urged open sharing. Marietta and the other artists called for disguise. Anselm and his fellow knights demanded fire and blood. The monks only observed and removed themselves quietly. As the debates grew in volume, they began to mute in Matthaeus's mind. The manuscripts of Greek, Latin, Arabic, Farsi, Sanskrit, and various other languages of cultures beyond Matthaeus's sliver of earth all smoldered before him on the alabaster slab, not with flame, but with possibility. He pressed his rosary to his chest, fingers white with tension. While his mouth was open, he belied his true feelings by saying nothing. Chapter 10. Holy Ultimatum.
Today the chamber felt colder than the monastic crypts. Father Theoderic spoke as though the city was already burnt to ash, and we are the only embers left to keep his wrath alive. He named me before all my brethren, entrusting me with the purges. His voice was iron, and every eye turned to me, as if I already agreed. I couldn't breathe. To accept or refuse was to betray.
The walls of the high chamber pressed in with smoke and silence. 100 candles bent in the draught, their flames flickering like anxious worshippers. The same wall tapestries of angels with drawn swords, of sinners writhing in fire, now threatened to inflame themselves at any moment. Matthaeus felt a chill creep down his spine, and his back itched from the weight of his robes. Beneath the tapestries, Father Theoderic stood as though cut from the same fabric. His words rang sharp as steel.
This pestilence spreads not only through flesh and word, but through soul. Whispers of false remedies, pagan philosophies, and dark arts still persist. This city will not fall to the arrogance of men who think themselves wiser than God.
Murmurs rippled across the gathered brothers. He raised his hand, and they stilled as if bound by chains.
There will be purges. Suspected heretics will be tried and their errors erased from our midst. This task—"
His gaze found Matthaeus and held it. The crucifix on Matthaeus's chest felt heavier, as though it pulled him downward into the stone.
"falls to you, investigator. Your careful methods have proven themselves in your diligence. You will lead these trials, you will root out corruption, and in so doing, preserve not only earthly bodies but godly souls."
The irony in those words struck Matthaeus like a hammer. Every head turned. Candles flickered, faces shifting between hope and expectation. His throat tightened as his fingers dug into his sides, yet his head bowed, eyes down, while his mind recoiled. It spun with visions of Johannes's vials, Marietta's stained glass, and Sir Anselm's rusted sword. At the chamber's edge, Brother Ulrich bent over a long desk, focused on his task as his quill scratched. He did not speak loudly, but his words carried in the hush.
"It will be entered, Father. The decrees, the names, the trials, the record will endure."
He spoke without lifting his eyes, while the ink chained Theodoric's command to the permanence of parchment. Matthaeus felt a tinge of betrayal as a brother's voice was now reduced to a functionary's tone, colorless. Perhaps in a different context, these words would have been more comforting than condemning. Theodoric's expression softened with a flash of approval.
"Good, what we speak here will not vanish. It will be remembered as our testament and as a warning."
As the holy brethren dispersed, Theodoric laid a hand on Matthaeus's shoulder, a touch meant as blessing, but instead burnt like a bovine branding. Ulrich remained at his desk, scratching on, unmoved by the exodus. His hunched form seemed small against the great tapestries above, yet the sound of his quill lingered, louder in Matthaeus's ears than the fading footsteps. Alone beneath the woven flames, Matthaeus no longer saw the justness of God's judgment in those tapestries. He only saw the cold machinery of fear, priests marching, scribes recording, pious obedience chained into lasting oppression. His chest ached, lungs tight as stone. Somewhere beneath the cathedral, hidden by shadows, he thought of the real, unbounded truth, waiting in corners the church could not yet reach, though it tried. Act 3, Metastasis. Chapter 11. The Trial of the Physician.
I cannot condemn him. Even as Father Theoderic hurled his accusations, even as the crowd waited for my voice to pronounce judgment, I felt only the unbearable truth. Johannes saves life, not death. Nothing is more godly than that. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of choosing rightly, when all else demanded unquestioned obedience.
The public square pulsed with activity, unusual for midday. Bodies rushed and pressed against each other, their voices hoarse from fear and prayer. At the center, a raised platform beheld a kneeling Johannes, chains fastened around his wrists, not for fire, but to render him a symbol of disgrace. Father Theodoric's voice rang out from a distance behind him, commanding the city's attention from out of sight, as if he were God himself.
"Johannes of Lübeck, you have defied the sacred will of heaven. You have sought to heal not by faith, but by dealings with the devil. Though civic law may protect your hand, it cannot shield your soul from judgment. By the authority of this church, your position is forfeited, your name dishonored, your tools destroyed. Let us all see the consequences of your heresy."
The crowd gasped, some crying in relief, others in outrage. A few knights stood at the edges of the crowd, bracing their movements at Theodoric's command. Some tossed delicate instruments onto the platform. They shattered in front of Johannes, who still held fast to a stoic expression. From the throng, Matthaeus felt a familiar hand brush against his own. Marietta slipped a folded scrap into his palm, a coded plea, begging for intervention, not from the divine, but from Matthaeus himself. Gripping the scrap, Slipping it into his sleeve with the psalter scrap from childhood, Matthaeus finally stepped forward, calling out to Father Theoderic.
Father, I cannot indict him. His knowledge preserves life. I will not condemn that which God may yet spare.
Theoderic's command immediately cut through.
Seize the doctor and his heretics.
The waiting knights lunged towards the platform, armor clanging and swords raised. The crowd around them watched with chaotic horror. Before the knights could drag Johannes away, more knights pushed through the crowd. Sir Anselm and his men loudly marched, grim and armed. They sliced through Theodoric's soldiers with precision as they made their way to the platform. Anselm's rusted sword was replaced by one of fresh steel. On the platform, weapons clanged and clashed. Men grunted and yelled. Crates flew and slid. The crowd beneath them scattered into panic. Amidst the fighting, Anselm struck the bonds that bound Johannes. His wrists were liberated as a hail of debris offered him cover. Johannes, shaken but unharmed, snuck around the struggling masses of metal and retrieved his satchel of manuscripts nearby, saving them from a fiery destruction. Anselm then shouted to his men over the cantankerous din.
Move, keep the doctor safe.
They formed a protective phalanx around Johannes, holding back Theodoric's knights with swords and shields, as the doctor led them off the platform and towards the cathedral. Within the chaos, Marietta seized Matthaeus's arm, following Johannes's lead.
Through the dungeons, hurry!
Heart hammering, he followed the artist and the others. Trailing behind them, still locked in combat, Anselm and his men slowed down, bottlenecking the advance of Theodoric's knights at the cathedral entrance. Matthaeus briefly paused as he looked back at them, catching a glance of Anselm between enemies. Without looking, Anselm yelled at him.
Go, save the knowledge that could not save us.
Matthaeus prayed a sign of the cross in their direction, and quickly turned back towards the cathedral. Behind him were sounds of clattering steel and screams of pain, echoing like haunting choirs of the damned through the hollow and hallowed hallways of the dungeons. Dust and stones fell as the commotion threatened the very foundations of the cathedral itself. Johannes and his associates moved with practiced determination to collect as many manuscripts as they could possibly carry.
We don't have much time,
Matthaeus called out, guiding the rest of the crowd forward. They all heard the sound of clanking armor quickly approaching. The earth itself seemed to groan as dust fell from the ceiling. They ran through mazes of stone and dirt, illuminated only by flames of light that danced erratically as they brushed past them. A large section of stone tumbled as they rushed past, closing off the passage and blocking the pursuing knights, forcing them into retreat before a mountain of stone became all of their graves. They eventually emerged into a forest beyond the city walls. Golden light of late afternoon dappled through the canopy. Aside from the chirping of birds and the crunching of leaf litter, the silence threatened whiplash, a stark contrast in light and sound from the oppressive darkness they had just left. Matthaeus didn't notice the contrast right away. He continued to run several yards into the forest. He eventually fell to his knees, eyes closed, and whispered a prayer clenched by grief, fear, and gratitude, mixed together like its own tincture against an internal illness. The others, catching their breath some distance behind him, bowed their heads in silence. Johannes wiped his face, careful to ensure the cryptic scrolls were safe. Marietta checked with the others, making a head count and supply list. After his prayers, Matthaeus exhaled, heart pounding. For the first time, Matthaeus felt the adrenalinic rush of something beyond fear, beyond compulsory duty. He named it agency, conviction, and this conviction had finally returned him to the setting of his childhood, a setting before the conviction of a church father extinguished his own. Marietta and the others all took in the colours. She led her band of scribes, plus some physicians, to forage for food and gather supplies. Amid the quiet, Matthaeus thought of Gabrielus and his Franciscan brethren. From their words, Matthaeus glimpsed what could be a new start, a sanctuary of thought, a fellowship where knowledge and faith might coexist, unburned, unbound, and always awaiting its season to bloom. Epilogue, a new order. Sunlight streamed through a modest chapel where saints and hidden planetary diagrams shimmered in the stained glass. Illuminated manuscripts lay open on wooden tables, the ink warm under fingers eager to trace letters and formulas. Matthaeus stood before an assembly of students, townsfolk, travellers, and novices. Johannes demonstrated remedies, while Marietta taught penmanship and artistry.
This order preserves truth without fear. We follow devotion, but not blind obedience. We honour honest inquiry as the ultimate test of balancing faith and reason.
Children traced diagrams from the light of Marietta's stained glass. A boy carefully followed the curve of a hidden planet in a saint's halo, while a girl doodled playing monsters beside her favourite prayers. The scent of ink and resin filled every room, grounding the abstract wonders in quiet, daily practice. Through the generations, authority still threatened to burn books and command obedience, though it could not quench curiosity. Knowledge persisted in hidden corners, whispered from hand to hand, mind to mind. In this quiet chapel, the seeds of a new renaissance found fertile soil in those who sought beyond what the Fathers commanded, in those now free to carry the spark forward, undimmed by fear.
The end. We hope you've enjoyed this production of
Plague of Thought, made with spoken.